This podcast is brought to you by Cubpub.org, the blog of the Columbia Political Union.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Cubcast. Today our discussion is about gay rights, and my guests are
Bruce Garrow, Cubpub contributor.
Sean Manning Udell, Columbia College Class of 2011 Vice President and President of the Columbia Queer Alliance.
Joy Chwanje, Co-President of Amnesty International.
Cato Gorman, President of the Columbia University College Democrats.
Okay, thank you all for being here. We have some heavy-hitting guests today. I want to start the discussion off on gender-neutral housing. I know there was a controversy this semester regarding the administration's decision to postpone or delay implementing gender-neutral housing. But what's the state of the proposal right now?
So currently we're in talks with Dean Schollenberger, who's the Dean of Student Affairs for Columbia College and the Engineering School. And we're also in talks with Dean Terry Martinez, who is the Dean of sort of Diversity and Affairs with Diversity. And what we're working with them on is creating a task force for gender-neutral housing. Though we incorporated a lot of administrators into the process that happened over the past year, and had a lot of different administrators who helped us write the policy as it was presented at Columbia College Student Council, Engineering Student Council, and then to Dean Moody Adams and Dean Peña-Mora. Those two deans, I guess, Deans Peña-Mora and Moody Adams, want to have a new proposal that incorporates, I guess, even higher deans at stake. Not themselves, but the Dean Schollenberger and Dean Martinez. So we're creating a housing task force. The task force is going to comprise of different constituencies that we feel are necessary to have a voice in creating a recommendation for whether or not gender-neutral housing is appropriate at Columbia, and then ultimately creating a proposal if it's decided that gender-neutral housing is appropriate for Columbia. And the timeline as it stands is that by the end of this month, we'll have a working task force that will where deans and students will be in direct communication with each other and sitting at the table together. And that through the summer, we'll each be working on our respective duties so that by the time we get back here in September, we'll be able to put together a first draft of the proposal, with September 16th being our deadline to have a first draft submitted to Deans Peña-Mora and Dean Moody Adams. The idea hopefully will resonate with them and that they'll like our first draft and that we'll be able to move forward with the logistical part of it. However, submitting it by September 16th gives us enough time to revise the proposal if for some reason there's a part that doesn't sit well with the two governing deans of Columbia College and the Engineering School. Ultimately, everything has to be in place by November because that's the time that we need to have logistics set for tours, for incoming first years, current students, parents, all these different constituencies. So the goal is by September 16th to have a working first draft.
Okay. Was there ever an understanding between the administration and the student groups that the policy would be implemented earlier than the 11-12 school year?
Yes and no. The way I've explained this to others, which I guess has been kind of salient, is that something got lost in the dean tubes. There were deans a lot of deans who were very supportive of the measure, and a lot of deans who expressed to us in private that this was something that they didn't foresee getting installed and that they saw getting installed for the 2010-2011 school year. Mm-hmm. Something happened. And we then heard, from Dean Schollenberger the week before it was publicly announced that, in fact, gender-neutral housing was not going to be a policy for 2010-2011.
And when did he announce that?
He announced that about 2 weeks before housing applications were opened up. So the timing seemed to indicate some purposeful administrative bureaucratic foot dragging.
Right. I don't know if anybody read there was a New York Post article about the policy, and some people say it distorted the policy, what its intentions were. But does anybody think that the school was a little bit rocked by that article. Maybe became hesitant to go forward with the policy, just regarding negative publicity. I mean, that's an argument that the Spectator seems to be going with in some of its recent editorials.
It's certainly a question. I mean, I think that the people who are in charge of all of this are very well educated and certainly enough to understand that the Post had a clear bias in their article and that the tone that the Post set was inappropriate. However, the tone definitely shifted through that sort of 2-week period of intense media scrutiny. So I don't know if it's entirely appropriate to blame it on the Post, but it certainly wasn't helpful.
Yeah. And it seems like it's a pretty difficult thing to implement in itself, just changing housing policy. Did people ever expect that this would happen quickly? Or was there always an understanding that it would take time?
Well, there's a different mindset among students and administrators. Students are only here for 4 years. I'm graduating next year. So for me, there was a sense of urgency to this. For administrators, there's a different timeline. And so while administrators are looking, they're looking for their best interests, students are looking for their own best interests, and those don't necessarily always mesh. I think we've come to a good compromise, and I think now it's sort of agreed upon that working for a gender-neutral housing proposal to be implemented by 2011, but in 2012 is at least realistic.
Okay. I want to open up the floor for everybody to answer this question. But it seems to me that there's an idea on campus that gender-neutral housing is not only an issue of comfort for LGBTQ students on campus, but that it's also part of a political statement, like part of the gay rights movement. How does that fit into the gay rights movement?
Well, I think a lot of the gay rights movement is to open up spaces where LGBTQ citizens and students and our classmates feel just as comfortable as every other student or person in the United States. And so I think, especially on a campus as liberal as Columbia, I think it's something that has to happen, and it has to happen soon. Columbia's been on the forefront of gay rights for many, many years, and this is one place where it's lagging behind a lot of other Ivy League schools and a lot of other schools in the country. So I think it's just something along the lines of really pushing to make sure that we do have a space on our campus that truly is 100% accepting and 100% providing of the right spaces and the good spaces for all of our students, regardless of what, gender identity or sexual orientation on our campus.